Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss a potential Tory trap being described in the Telegraph in order to allow Sunak to create a wedge issue over Labour's £28 billion a year plans for investment in building up green industries in the UK. So what does this trap involve, and is it really going to be a problem for Labour? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So the Tories are currently attacking Labour's plans for ramping up investment in green industries to £28 billion a year. It was originally to have been £28 billion a year from the start. And because the economy got so much worse over this year, or the last year I should say now, it's a new year, they've now said they may have to start lower and build up. In reality, we won't know what the final detail is until Rishi Sunak calls the election and Labour publish their manifesto. And the Tories and their client media are claiming that this investment will lead to an extra £2,200 tax bill per family or an extra 5% on the first income tax band. However, this is nonsense for numerous reasons. First of all, they've done what the Tories always do. So they take a spending pledge. They go, oh, look, you want to spend this amount? OK. They've divided it by the number of households or people, or in this case, families, and said, oh, it will cost this extra in taxes. Oh, and they also get the calculation wrong, which means it's actually even worse than that. But a few things to point out. So first of all, if you divide £28 billion by the number of households, you actually get a figure of £990. The Tories have claimed that it's an extra £2,200 not per household, but per family. And you go, OK, not every household is a family. So you look up the value, number of families in the UK, and you go, OK, divide that. And I mean, it's quite odd. Odd, you think? Why would Labour only tax families and not non-family households? Like, they're going to go round households and go, oh, there's like one person living there. That's not a family. No, we're not going to tax you. Next household. Oh, you've got a family? Yeah, we're taxing you. That would be odd. But then the Tories are odd. But that still works out at £1,440 per family. A far cry from their £2,200. I genuinely don't know. I've actually tried a few things. I don't know what they've done to get that. And I used to be a maths teacher. So I've actually got experience of trying to reverse engineer crazy answers from students to see where they went wrong. But you'd still say, well, 1,440 extra still seems a lot, doesn't it? Yes, if Labour actually plan on applying this cost to families. But that's not how public spending works. First of all, the figure will be borrowed, meaning no increase in any taxes to pay for it at all. But borrowing has to be paid back in the future. You've got to service the debt, Phil. Come on, keep up. Well, they're just, you'd think they're loading up a future tax bill then, aren't they? No. See, when the Tories borrow, if they're giving that money to their mates, yes, you end up paying higher taxes later on because you don't get a return on it. Case in point, the Tories are borrowing over £140 billion a year at the moment. And we're not getting any investment for that borrowing. This is why the rate of tax is the highest it's been for 70 years, because the Tories kept borrowing, but didn't use the money they were borrowing to build infrastructure to allow the economy to grow and therefore be able to naturally get more taxes in at a lower tax rate. So the tax rate's been going up, and it's going up again next year, despite all their talk, or this year, despite all their talk of tax cuts. I still can't get my head into which year it is. But Labour's borrowing is for investment in industry, specifically for the green industrial revolution, which means that the costs, which will come later, will then be levied on those industries who will be profiting from the investment when it comes time to pay it back. Because if you don't provide this investment, then those businesses won't grow. They won't exist. They won't be there to make profits to pay into the treasury. But if you invest in a way that allows businesses to grow and to flourish, to make more money in a few years' time, when it comes time to service that debt, you're naturally raking in higher taxes, and those taxes are what's used to service the debt. So that means there's nothing, absolutely zero extra to pay for ordinary households or just households with families in them. Nothing extra in taxes at all. The money won't come from income tax. It won't come from national insurance. It will just naturally be levied on the taxes on the extra profits from the businesses who've benefited from this investment. But this is not how the Tory client media present it. They say, well, this borrowing will lead higher taxes, while simultaneously ignoring the record high borrowing and taxes that the Tories are engaged in right now. And according to the Telegraph, the way they think this works as setting a trap for Starmer and Reeves is they're reporting that the government are considering changing the fiscal rules for borrowing ahead of the election. So they explain the current rules. It's like, look, you know, if debt has to fall as a share of GDP over a 5-year period, you can say you're bringing debt down. So Rishi Sunak's going, well, over 5 years, debt's going to fall as a share of GDP, therefore I'm bringing debt down, right? Even though that's not actually happening. The idea supposedly being mooted is that the government could change this so that you put the emphasis not on the amount of borrowing, but the cost of servicing the debt as a share of GDP or of overall public spending. And they think they can trap Labour there because at the moment the Conservatives are borrowing a hell of a lot of money. And they plan to reduce that borrowing in a few years' time. But the cost of servicing that massive amount of borrowing will still be there for Labour to deal with. So that's where they think there's a sort of trap there. And the Telegraph claim this will force Starmer to show whether he plans to increase borrowing or not. Now, don't get me wrong. Because the public really don't understand borrowing and because the Tory media put so much emphasis on Labour's 28 billion and don't mention at all the Tory 140 billion, you can see why Labour will need to keep their cards close to their chest. But it's not immediately clear how this change would create an extra problem for Labour. Because the situation right now is the Tories and their media are claiming that Labour's spending plans will raise taxes for ordinary people. They won't, but they're claiming it anyway. And that's with the current fiscal rules. So how would this change add extra weight to the claim? As the investment is intended to stimulate GDP, Labour will just claim, well, look, the extra servicing of the debt will be lower than the increase in GDP. So the cost of servicing the debt as a share of GDP would go down. And let's say, because I go back to the facts, we're not just talking about the cost of servicing this £28 billion worth of debt. We're talking about servicing the cost of the £600 or £700 billion of extra borrowing that Rishi Sunak, as Chancellor and Prime Minister, is lumping the next Labour government to deal with. So let's say it's the cost of servicing that debt that they think is going to create the problem because the Tories have left this ticking time bomb of debt to deal with. You know, so Sunak and Hunt changed the fiscal rules to put the emphasis on the servicing of that debt to give that future Labour government a problem in a few years' time. So let's say Labour in power, they're investing this money, which comes from the extra borrowing, and the economy remains more sluggish than they would like, or for whatever other reason, they see this ticking time bomb and going, yeah, that's going to blow up in our faces. Or even if they just suspect it might, they'll just change the rules back because they will be in government then. In fact, if Sunak goes ahead with this plan, as I see it, he just gives Labour options. If Labour prefer the current set of rules, they just change them right back after the election. If the Tories complain, and they obviously will, the media go, oh, they're changing these rules, you see, to benefit themselves. Labour just respond by going, no, we're not. We're changing them back to the way they were for 14 years of Tory government. The change they've changed back was a pre-election gimmick by Rishi Sunak. And if the old rules were good enough for the Tories for 14 years, right up until the point they realised they were going to lose power, they're good enough for Labour for the next 14. And if Labour prefer the new rules, and maybe they would, then they could just leave them alone. In fact, governments change fiscal goalposts quite a bit anyway. The Tories have done so several times. I mean, Rishi Sunak, a few years ago when he was still Chancellor, tried to downplay the state of the economy in one autumn budget so that he could then say he'd perform some economic miracle in the following spring budget. They do it all the time. Like I say, I don't want to downplay dirty tricks where public spending plans are concerned. We know the Tories use them. We know they're effective. We know the Tory media keep people ignorant of basic economics, and they report spending plans for Labour in a completely inconsistent way with spending plans for the Conservatives. We know all that. We know it works. We know it is a potential hazard. But I just don't see how this plan works in the Tories' favour. Like, I don't see it being a trap for Labour because it doesn't allow them to put the focus on Labour's borrowing because they do that already. and they make stuff up already, like I've already explained. They just make stuff up. So they can already do that now. This doesn't allow them to do it more easily. It could only be a trap for Labour in government, but when they're in government, they can just change it. You know, and before the election, Labour will just simply claim that their investment will raise GDP, which is a claim which will be backed up by industry and independent economists. And they just dodge the bullet anyway. Now, I will emphasise that this is just an idea being floated, which the Telegraph have chosen to give prominence to. It's not that the government are doing this, they're just thinking about it. But the fact that the Telegraph are reporting on it, they've written an entire article just on this thing, to me reveals a number of things. First, the Tories are focused on laying traps for Labour rather than managing the economy. Brown and Darling weren't engaged in anything like this ahead of the 2010 general election, were they? They weren't changing things to make it awkward for whomever won the following election. It shows just what disregard the Tories have for the economy and the country, that they are actively working out ways to make it more difficult for whoever wins the following election to manage the economy. Second, it shows that the Tories don't think their usual tricks will be enough. In fact, the article quotes someone they say is a senior Tory as saying that, you know, this focus on the 28 billion on its own is no good and that they need something better. In other words, it may be the Tories don't feel they can win the economic argument without some extra dirty tricks. Third, it highlights a fairly desperate situation for the Tories. I get that the Treasury will probably be considering lots of things right now, but a major Tory media outlet to be putting the emphasis on this suggests that it's not only been seriously considered, but also one of the better ideas they have. If this is about the level of the best they can come up with, they are in trouble. It doesn't give them an extra stick to beat Labour with before the election. If it's bothersome for Labour afterwards, they'll just change it in their first budget. And as a final thought, I do wonder what message the Telegraph were even trying to convey to their readers. That the Tories are trying to fiddle fiscal rules for electoral gain? How does that help? But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.